Following their most recent win against the Indiana Pacers, the Milwaukee Bucks will try to bounce back and get back on track just in time for Giannis to return from injury. We're going to talk a little bit about the entire Giannis trade saga and why this podcaster slash writer actually completely perfectly explained my thought process when it comes to Giannis and him requesting a trade and all of this. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Damian Lillard Miles Turner debacle, the whole wave and stretch and bringing on Miles, and just overall, in a kind of retrospective fashion, what the move has turned out to be and how I view it in the long run. And also, we're going to be looking ahead to the Bucks' next game against the Memphis Grizzlies. All that and more on today's episode of Bucks Latest, presented by the good people over at FanArch. As always, I'm your host, Dean Simon. And before we get into everything, please make sure to leave a like, leave a comment down below, and subscribe. We're still on the road to 2,000 subs, so if that's a journey you feel compelled to join, please consider pressing that big red subscribe button down below, and also turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on future Milwaukee Bucks updates. So, first things first, the last time we talked was before actually the win against the Pacers. What I think the final score was 111-94, and for all intents and purposes, that game, in my view, was a fantastic tune-up game for a lot of different guys on this roster, namely Miles Turner, who maybe didn't have the most poppy box score numbers, and maybe he didn't look amazing from a rebounding perspective, but I felt, just again, in the sense of the word of it being a tune-up game, that it was good for him to kind of show a little bit more aggression on the boards, and it seemed like he was more into it, I guess, when it came to boxing out and limiting offensive rebounds and also crashing the glass and grabbing offensive rebounds for himself. And in effect, from boxing out as well on the offensive glass, allowing his teammates to come in and clean up possessions as well with putbacks. I felt like, again, I've talked about the energy a lot this season and whether it was there or the lack thereof throughout the course of the year so far. But against the Pacers, it was there, and I feel like it was the leading factor, other than Ryan Rollins just being awesome, leading the Bucks to that win. So, in with that being said, I think this is perfect because I've said before that this part of the schedule is going to be arguably the biggest part of the schedule for the Milwaukee Bucks throughout the rest of the year. It's kind of a gimme, it's a layup in certain aspects where they could get right back on track. They can get towards 500 again if things go smoothly, and then just in time, hopefully, for Giannis to return to the floor and contribute to winning once again. So that game against the Pacers, maybe from just all perspectives all around, I feel like that was a nice, not a wake up call, but kind of a call to action almost to get the rest of the team involved and get guys going and really convince guys that this is a part of the schedule where you can completely turn around the image of your season so far, or at least how people are or the media are viewing you from the outside looking in. This is a chance for you to completely rewrite uh or right your wrongs and change people's expectations, and again, just in time for Giannis to come back. But speaking of, we're kind of going to get into really the meat and potatoes of this episode, and that's because I was listening to a podcast recently that included writer, podcaster extraordinaire Rob Mahoney of The Ringer, and they were talking about Giannis. He and the other people on said podcast, I forget which, but Rob Mahoney was kind of airing his grievances about Giannis Antetokounmpo and kind of just giving his thoughts about the entire situation to this point, and especially the recent comments that he made where he was talking about how he was kind of just standing behind his agent and letting his agent speak for him in discussions with the Bucks front office and with other potential trade suitors and things of that nature, and how it just doesn't make any sense at all. And the way that I had explained it is that, and I was hoping that others in the NBA media sphere had looked at it the same way, is just that Giannis is one of the greatest players of all time in terms of being this he's amazing at navigating the media and keeping this 1 foot in, 1 foot out approach with regard to being on this team, whether he wants to remain committed to Milwaukee, whether he wants to stay and win titles. He's just a master at giving the Bucks front office the indication of, I love this team. I love being here for this franchise. But if you don't do right by me, I'm going to leave. But I love it here, but I'll leave. He's just amazing, again, at that 1 foot in, 1 foot out game. And a comment that he had made was he basically said that any conversations that his agent has with the Bucks front office, like that his representation has with the Bucks front office, that's between the agent and the Bucks. It's not between Giannis. Giannis is completely out of the situation. But Rob Mahoney came in and basically explained it better than I ever could, where he basically just said that Giannis is too big for this, both in physical stature and just what he means to the franchise, what he means to the NBA, where, he's just too good of a player, he's too great of a superstar, he's too great of an all-time legend to be like, "Oh yeah, my agent's got this all under control. I'm just going to hide behind my agent and the conversations he has with the Bucks front office." That makes no sense. Giannis, and this is something Rob Mahoney said too, that Giannis is in one of those situations, one of those unique situations where he has a ton of number one, a ton of leverage to talk with the Bucks front office, whether he wants to remain with the Bucks, whether he wants to find a suitable trade destination that he requests. And the reason why this position is so unique is because he's one of those guys where he's been with the team for long enough where fans would completely understand if he were to request a trade, if he felt like the organization hasn't done enough to, keep a championship core around him, or that they haven't built the right kind of team to support him. Fans, for the most part, by and large, would understand why he'd be disgruntled, why he'd request a trade, and would likely not have as big of a deal. Again, like if you're outside of Milwaukee, that they wouldn't have as big of a deal with him just requesting a trade and just putting his foot down and saying, "I want out." That wouldn't necessarily be a problem, but it's the fact that he remains, and again, in the words of Rob Mahoney, that he remains so conflicted with what he wants to do, and that he hasn't just completely went one direction or the other. He hasn't, really made it clear what he wants to do. It just is making the whole situation worse, and it makes him look worse because you would rather him just be outright and forthcoming and honest about the whole situation rather than just dragging it on, continuing it, and making it a will he, won't he kind of thing for, until February 5th, the trade deadline comes. That's the biggest, you know, complaint that anybody can have about the situation. Not that Giannis could want a trade or that he could get traded or anything involving that. And or even like the make up the team, anything of that nature. It's just the fact that he is playing with the Bucks, with Bucks fandom, and he just with the way that he's just not clear about anything that he's saying, the way that he's just going back and forth, it makes him look worse. And I just thought that the words of Rob Mahoney saying, Giannis is just, he's too big for this situation. Again, physically, and just I forget the word I'm trying to get at here, but just overall, he's too big of a presence, I should say, for him to just kind of be like, yeah, my agent's got it all under control. You are the superstar. Everything about this situation is revolving around you, your wants and needs. So if anything, Giannis, why don't you take advantage of that situation and just go to the front office and say concrete, I want to get out of here or I don't, or I'm going to remain committed, because just the way that this keeps getting dragged on, it doesn't make him look good. And that's really all I have to say on the matter. I've kind of explained my thoughts on it previously, where again, it doesn't really make any sense to me, but that's just a little thing that I saw recently, that when I heard Rob Mahoney say those words where he's just too big for the situation, that with him not choosing to go a certain direction, that it makes him look worse, that it spoke to me perfectly and gave me a sense, I need to kind of talk about that or reference that in the next episode. But anyways, moving forward, just a little bit of something about the Damian Lillard Miles Turner wave and stretch to bring Miles on. Um, One thing that I will say is that, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I saw an article recently from Fansided that was kind of detailing the way that the Bucks have messed up the entire situation here with Miles in the aftermath of the Dame wave and stretch. That they've kind of they shot themselves in the foot essentially for both the present and the future, because even if you were to get rid of Giannis, because Giannis likely is looking around and saying this team isn't good enough for me to compete, even if you lose Giannis and you recoup some kind of assets for him, the handicap of the Damian Lillard $22.5 million are giving him every year for the next half decade, essentially, that's just gonna again put even more of a handicap on your team and not really allow you to initiate that rebuild or really compete at all. But one thing that I will say is that regardless of how you look at the move in hindsight, because of course hindsight's 2020, I think you look at it from my perspective and say that the front office, you have to applaud the front office at least for doing something. And maybe this is going to be the unpopular opinion, but in my view, I would much rather the front office swing and miss and, just swing in general rather than sit on their hands, not do anything, and just come into the next year with a team that is surely not able to compete without Miles Turner and, with Damian Lillard shelved for an entire year that would make Giannis more than certainly request a trade. I appreciate that the Bucks front office, they saw the situation, they realized that it's really coming down to it. We need to do something in order to convince Giannis to stay. And again, solely my view, what they did was pull off one of the most surprising, arguably the most surprising move of the offseason this past year, and bring in Miles Turner to make what was, thought to be, again, still about a third of the way through the season. There's still a lot of time left for these guys to really get settled in and figure out how to play with each other on the defensive end. But to create a Miles Turner, Giannis Antetokounmpo front court, in theory, which is perfect on defense and also gives Giannis a perfect floor spacing center to replace Brook Lopez. Like, just in from that perspective, it seemed perfect, or maybe not perfect, but a much more suitable option than whatever the Bucks could have done in that kind of situation where you needed to get rid of, or you didn't need to get rid of Dame, but you were going to have him for a year, where you needed to do something to keep Giannis to stay. That I appreciate the front office taking a swing. And regardless of how it looks now, I mean, of course you would like to give them credit if it were to work out well, and it hasn't so far. But I will always appreciate the front office taking the chance and, and rolling the dice and doing whatever they possibly can to try to keep Giannis happy, even if it doesn't work. Because again, it's just better to take a swing than to strike out looking, essentially, if we want to get really into the baseball terminology here. But anyways, coming up, game against the Memphis Grizzlies, and this will just be yet another game on this part of the schedule where basically for 7 or 8 consecutive games, starting with that game in Indy, where the Bucks are going to be facing all teams that are below, or were below 500. I know the Warriors are like the last game on that schedule, and I think they just got back over 500 last night. Um, so just again, a huge opportunity for this team, and the next game is going to be coming up against the Memphis Grizzlies. And one thing that I don't love for this matchup, even though the dysfunctional is not, it doesn't do this Memphis Grizzlies team justice, especially with how Ja Morant has operated throughout the season. But one thing that I don't love is that outside of Ryan Rollins, Bucks perimeter defenders have been having trouble keeping guys in front of them. And Ja Morant, regardless of how bad he's played so far, regardless of how bad of a jump shooter he's been so far, you can never really count him out to have some kind of comeback outing, some kind of explosive outing, especially against a Bucks team that's sorely lacking in the perimeter defensive category, and also their rim defense hasn't really been up to par throughout the first portion of this season, especially with Miles Turner again not really getting into a groove at the basket in terms of his blocked shots numbers and just overall presence as a rim to turn. He's kind of their only guy there, and when he's not playing well, it seems like everybody's getting a free pass to the rim or a free pass to the free throw line. And I feel like that's easily something that could happen with a guy like Ja Morant, who's barreling into guys looking for contact, that you could, and this isn't an official prediction or anything, but you could see a guy like Ja Morant shooting 12 free throws, 14 free throws in this game, just if he's heading to the rim with reckless abandon, because that's been one of the Bucks' biggest problems so far, is defending, especially at the basket, without fouling. And again, against a guy like Ja Morant, who has proven to be one of the most explosive athletes and attackers of the rim that this league has, even if he's off a little bit to begin a year, that's still just a very scary premise to be going up against him. Also, Jaren Jackson Jr., that's always a tough matchup. But I'm looking forward to how the Bucks are going to counteract that, because you wouldn't necessarily think that, Miles Turner isn't going to be stuck with the Jaren Jackson matchup, but outside of him, where do you go? Because there's guys that just aren't strong enough. They don't have the combination of strength and athleticism to handle Jaren Jackson Jr. When you talk about guys like Kyle Kuzma, who he's athletic enough, but he's not strong enough. And Bobby Portis, maybe he's a little bit stronger, but he's still not as strong and he's still not as athletic. So any matchup that Jaren Jackson Jr. faces, it's kind of going to be a nightmare. So, and this is without even regarding all the surrounding pieces like Jalen Wells, who has proven to be a pretty awesome two-way guy in his second year now. Cedric Howard, who's proven to be one of the better rookies this year. I don't know if Zach Edey still injured. If he's not, then this is going to be a whole heck of a lot worse as well, because we've seen Miles Turner and the rest of the guys in the front court struggle rebounding against Ryan Kalkbrenner of the Charlotte Hornets. So Zach Edey, you could look for a potential, 30, 15, and 5 game from that guy. Not really, but the rebounding or the limiting offensive rebounds, that's going to be a major concern, especially if Zach Edey is in the lineup, because yeah, that's just how it's been all year. Even though Jaren Jackson and Miles Turner are kind of the same in a lot of ways, where they're not the best rebounders. They're pretty good 3-point shooters for their positions. Um, but even with Jaren Jackson's lack of rebounding, I feel like this is a game where the Bucks could potentially get beaten on the boards pretty bad, especially if Zach Edey's in the lineup. I forget if it was him that had some sort of a long or longer term injury where he would be out for a couple of weeks. Maybe I'm getting my guys mixed up, as maybe I'm prone to do. But yeah, if Zach Edey's in the lineup, that's going to be a lot worse. But anyways, that'll be it for me today. Thank you very much for tuning into another episode of Bucks Latest, presented by the good people over at FanArch. Again, I've been your host, Dean Simon, and before you go, leave that like, leave that comment down below, and subscribe. Still on that road to 2K subs, so if you want to hit that subscribe button, please do. Also, turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on future episodes. All right, I will see you guys in the next one. Go Bucks.